Good morning, Jon Mutchler, pastor at the Ferndale Alliance Church, and our title of this message today is Do Not Go to Church. Do not go to church if, and we'll finish that in just a moment here. We are looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and today I'm going to read from chapter 5, verses 21 through 24 that go like this. You have heard it said long ago to the people, you shall not murder. Verse 22, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, which means you worthless one, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Verse 23, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, you're going to the place of worship, you're going to church, you're going to the synagogue, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you. Leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Did you know that 3 times Jesus uses the phrase brother or sister? Now, technically in the Greek, it's just the word brother, but we understand that to mean men and women. And so the NIV Bible has updated the translation to say brother or sister. 3 times that is used. It's used with being angry. We should not be angry with a brother or sister. We should not name call a brother or sister, and then it says we should be thoughtful whether or not we have offended a brother or sister. I find this incredibly interesting that Jesus uses the phrase brother or sister here instead of what he uses elsewhere. When he says to love our neighbor, that's a wider circle, or love your enemy, which is a different circle or people. Even other places in the Bible where the word says that we are to love the stranger and the alien. For example, in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 19, it says to love the foreigner. But here, in this issue of anger and name-calling and offense, Jesus hones in on our closest relationships. Perhaps he is suggesting here even our family relationships when he says to be careful of these things with your brother and sister. This clearly indicates a concern about family, perhaps the congregational life, the church, the synagogue, those that would normally be closest to us. Jesus is telling us to take extra caution. Perhaps Jesus knows this, that we sometimes take advantage over those that we're closest to and think we can get away with things because, after all, they have to forgive us. They're family or they belong to our church. There's a tendency to again, take advantage of those relationships and perhaps treat people more harshly, more unreasonably, more cruelly that are closest to us. Does that make sense to you? It kind of makes sense to me. I think Jesus is telling us something that we know instinctively, if we think about it, that we are sometimes rougher, more mean-spirited, more angry, more harsh with those closest to us, our family members, our close friends, those in our circle of worship, community of worship, the synagogue or the church or things like that, that we can be extra harsh on them because we know that we have to get along with them and they have to get along with us. We expect them to forgive and forget. And so I think there's a tendency to be extra, can I just say the word, nasty towards people we are closest with. Just think through your own relationships. Think about the greatest conflicts and sources of anger and disappointment that you have had. Don't they generally occur with people closest to you? I think there's just an expectation that, hey, they got to get along with me so I can perhaps be a little bit nastier to them. I also think this has application and consideration during this Black Lives Matter period of time. Here we are in the middle of the year 2020, Black Lives Matter, and of course, absolutely, of course, Black Lives Matter. I like to say that all Black lives matter. They all matter to me. They should matter to you. And what do I mean by all Black lives matter? Simple statistics. How many African American men, unarmed men, were killed by police officers in the year 2019? It's less than a dozen. In fact, the number that I keep reading is the number 9. Unarmed Black men killed by police officers. That is 9 too many. But here's my other question, and I looked it up today. How many African American men were murdered each year? I think I have statistics for 2018. I don't know 2019. It's been going down. By the way, the last 20, 25 years, all homicides have been going down every year. Good news. That's good news for everybody. But it's still over 7,000 African Americans, and most of them are young Black men, were murdered. And here is the part of the story that I think is important, and I think where Jesus is relevant here. Most of the African American homicide victims were killed by African Americans. It's about 90% each year. So the homicide rate, over 7,000 of them, African Americans each year, 90% committed by fellow African Americans. That is a problem, and that's why I want to say that all Black lives matter. They all matter. So what is Jesus telling us here? He's telling us here, deal with the anger issues at the closest relationships that you have. And a lot of our closest relationships are going to be relationships within our ethnic communities, within our neighborhoods. Whether that's good or bad, it's just a matter of fact. And so I think along with police reform, I am fully committed to police reform. Absolutely, have always been. But how about reform among relationships within our families and within our communities, especially the African American family, which is so fractured and broken up? There needs to be, can I just say this? There needs to be a reconciliation, a rebuilding of relationship between African American men and their children, especially their sons. And a lot of these young men are growing up without a committed father there to teach and guide them and help them to stay out of trouble. So Jesus is saying, it's your brother or sister. That relationship is really important, and I want you to deal with it. I want you to deal with anger. I want you to deal with inappropriate name calling and unnecessary offense with your brother or your sister as a way towards success, as a way towards peace, and a way towards healthy relationships, which will obviously lead to a healthier society. Yeah, Black lives matter. All Black lives matter to me. And so Jesus is speaking of abusiveness in relationships. And I think he is suggesting here that the closer we are to people, the more abusive the relationship can be. And certainly the hurt and injury cause is certainly going to be greater. We're obviously hurt more when we are offended by someone near to us than some stranger in our lives. And I think Jesus is telling us we need to deal with hate, we need to deal with anger, and we need to deal with unnecessarily offenses in all of our relationships, but starting with those that are closest to us. I think about clergy members that I speak with all the time. This might seem surprising to you, but when I use the word clergy abuse, it goes both ways. Certainly, there are members of the clergy, as there are in every profession, that abuse their constituents, their membership. But it goes both ways. There are a number of people in congregations that are just downright abusive towards clergy members. You know why? Because they know they can get away with it. Because members of the clergy, pastors, priests, ministers, they're the ones expected to be more gracious, more forgiving, more accepting. And so because of that, they can take a lot of abuse. I'll tell you that firsthand, but also countless numbers of stories of things said to and at and against people in church ministry because I think people think they can get away with. So the closer the circle of relationships, the greater the potential of harm. Is this important to Jesus? It must be, because he talks about those that are offenders in this. They are subject to judgment. That's in verses 21 and 22. They are in danger of hell. That's in verse 22. And we mentioned the other day that hell is the word for this valley of Hinnom. This Gehenna is the word, this place of Hinnom. It was a horribly dirty, awful garbage dump outside of Jerusalem that was always burning with fires that were fueled by garbage and junk. And he's kind of saying there, if you call somebody worthless, you're the one that's going to be worthless and fit for the garbage dump. And so these are really serious matters with Jesus. I don't know how he could possibly have used any stronger language when he talks about unnecessarily offending people and how important it is to reconcile with a brother and sister. Now, if I were to say to you, what is the highest priority in your life, and you probably think you know the answer because you know who I am and what I do, you'd say God's the highest priority. Church is the highest priority. Jesus is saying here, though, if you show up at your place of worship and you remember that you have offended somebody, that somebody's offended by you, don't go in. Stop right there at the front door. Leave your offering there, which is kind of an interesting. Why does he say that? I'm going to suggest here because that you're still committed to your place of worship. Your place of worship still needs your financial support. So leave your offering there, but before you actually formally present it, you go back and make things right with your brother or your sister. That's pretty cool. This takes a higher precedence over worship, over corporate worship. We're all staying home from church for all sorts of reasons these days, notably COVID-19 and this pandemic. And those are good reasons. If you are infected, if you are susceptible, if you are showing symptoms, yeah, stay home. But here Jesus is saying, telling us, stay home for another reason. You need to stay home or go home to make things right with a brother. And don't come back until you know you have made every effort at reconciliation. The verse I always like to use on this theme, it's one of my life verses. It's Romans 12:18, which says this. And I'm going to end with this today. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, a couple great phrases there. If it is possible, and by the way, if somebody's already passed away, you can't do much about that. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Isn't that cool? There's a caveat there. There's an out there. Sometimes it's just not possible. But we have to ask ourselves the questions. And it's probably better to ask friends the question, have I done everything I could possibly do to repair this relationship? Even, by the way, even if you're only 5% wrong, maybe, and I won't even argue with you, maybe the other person was 95% in the wrong. But if we were 5% responsible for the problem, because of what we did, because of what we said, I believe Jesus says, I want you to come to your place of worship with a clean heart, a pure conscience, and to do that, make peace with your brother or your sister. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but in the meantime, I want you just to think, if I can say this, pray, say, Lord, would you please bring to mind anyone that I've offended or who would say that they were offended by me and I've not made an effort to make it right. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more next time about what we do about that. But thank you for watching and listening. May God be with you as you seek to be at peace with everyone.